Welcome, difference makers. My name is Stephanie Johnson, and I am the creator of Baby Bear, a bottom-up approach to growing strong brains and bodies. I couldn't be more thrilled about the hour we have together today, and by the end of this hour, you will know what I mean by a bottom-up approach to child development. You will also have a deeper understanding of why infant movement is so crucial for brain development. And probably most importantly, you will understand what your role is as an infant care provider and things that you can do to make sure that infants that are in your care are getting the best start possible. Before we get started learning, I would like to invite you to stand up, find some space for yourself. We're going to do something called the brain dance. It will warm up your bodies, but most importantly, warm up your brains for our learning together today. So just find a nice place to stand. Move the chairs out of your way if you need to, and find your feet grounded on the floor. Check in with your knees and see if they're locked, kind of stiff. And if they are, no big deal. Just put a little juice in your knees. That way the energy can come up through our whole body as we breathe in through our nose and out, making kind of a shush noise. Great, we'll do that 2 more times. Breathing in through your nose if you can. At the top this time, let's gulp in 3 more breaths. Pause while the air expands our lungs and blow out with a shush. Great, guys. Last time, breathing in. 3 more gulps. Hold it at the top. Feel those lungs expanding while you hold it. And final Great. Now we're going to rub our hands together, creating some warmth. We're going to wake up our skin a little bit. Believe it or not, waking up the skin is super important for learning. It really helps the brain out. So we're going to tap, 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 tap all the way down and up the arm. Switch arms, down and up the arm. We're going to go down the front of the body, come up the back of the body. And we are going to get the face, of course, be really gentle though, right? You don't want to whack, whack, whack on the face, but we do want to just tap, 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 tap. Maybe a little tap, tap, tap on the cheeks, chin, forehead. And then we're going to go ahead and tap right here in the chest a little extra. Great. Now we're going to go to a brushing. So this just feels a little different. Brushing, brushing, brushing. I always say try to go firmer than lighter because we're really trying to wake up the skin and get some blood going here. Again, face. Sometimes I like to squeeze from the sides. And lastly, we're going to do squeezing, which we just did to our head. So go ahead and, I guess I was getting excited about squeezing my head because it feels so nice. Squeeze up and down these arms. You're going to just press into the front of your body. Squeeze when it feels right, but sometimes we need to press. And then we're going to come up the back of the body. It's okay to touch your hips and your back. And now for the official squeeze. I go front and back. Just give a little pressure. Side to side. There you are. Wonderful. Moving on. We'll find our navel and we have 6 end points. 1, 2, feet 3, 4, and then head and tail make up 5 and 6. When we breathe in, we're going to reach out through all 6 points, breathing in big. When we breathe out, we're going to curl into our navels, including the head and tail. Good. Breathing in and out. Few more times on your own time. Breathing in and out. I didn't warn you about this. If your hair is getting in your face like mine, just brush it out of the way. Breathing in. Last time, curling in tight into the belly. Go ahead and stand upright. We're going to bend your knees. And we're going to get your hips and your head going to the same side. Side, 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 side. If we try to do this with straight legs, it's really hard. We don't really get our head and tail going to the same direction. So go ahead and go to good, generous bend in the knees, and it frees up the hips. Hips and head go to the same side. There you go. Beautiful, friends. Now what we're gonna do is go ahead and anchor our legs. I want you to feel like you're pressing your legs and your feet into the floor so they're very strong and you wouldn't blow over, because here comes the wind, right? We're making a big windy action with our arms, but our legs are so strong. Switch directions. Now guys, you can copy me exactly what I'm doing, or you can do whatever big motions you want with your arms. I'm gonna go twisty a little bit. Notice the bigger you move with your arms and your chest, your legs have to be real strong. Good, tip over with those strong legs, keeping you sturdy. Great, and now arms reach out to the side and they're real strong. Think about if someone were gonna come hang something on your arms, they could. And now just bring the knees up with those strong arms staying still. Wonderful. And if you haven't moved for a while, you might be getting winded. Hang in there. We are almost done with your warm up. Great, guys. Now make a book. We're going to close your book and open your book. You might not be able to see my legs, but my legs are doing exactly what my arms are doing. So I close the whole half, open the whole half, close the whole half, open the whole half, close and open. Great. Arms go up. And we go same elbow as knee is gonna flex. You'll notice one side stays straight and the other side bends to meet each other. Wonderful. Now we're gonna change this a little bit. We're gonna go opposite arm as leg. Great. And if you want, you can experiment with opposite knee to leg. It definitely requires something a little bit different in the stomach area, but that's a nice challenge too. Let's try some in the back. Opposite arm and foot. Great, guys. Now, find your standing again. Arms go out in front of you. Thumbs go down. Cross your hands. Clasp your hands. Tuck them up and around. There's your arms. Now, cross your two strong legs. Press your tongue up to the roof of your mouth. You might be able to feel your heart thumping against your chest. We'll stay here for a few more moments. And then we uncross our two strong legs. Each fingertip finds a friend. Breathe in big. We're gonna make a whale noise. It sounds like this. Ooh. And I might have been the only one making the noise that time, so breathe in big. We'll give you a second shot. Breathe in big. Ooh. Very nice, my friends. I hope you feel ready to learn. Body and brain is energized and ready to go. All right, welcome back, difference makers. Hopefully you feel awake and ready to go. In this segment, we are going to talk about what I mean when I say bottom-up approach to child development. So we'll talk about a top-down approach, a bottom-up approach, and just flesh those two concepts out a little bit. And what I'd like you to do first is, if you're comfortable, close your eyes. I'm going to guide you through a visualization, just a short imagination here. And if closing your eyes doesn't feel appropriate, that's okay. Maybe just take your gaze down. A way to bring your attention inward. And I would like you to just imagine a really big, mature tree. So get a picture of a tree. Maybe it's the one in your front yard. Maybe it's the one at the park you and your children visit. Maybe it's one you saw in a movie and it really struck you, but just get an image of that big mature tree. See its leaves, its bark, the ground around it, the sun shining on it. Maybe it's a fall day in your picture. Maybe it's a spring day and things are just budding. Now for a moment, I want you to imagine that you have some X-ray vision. You can see into the earth. And you're going to check out the root system of this big, beautiful, impressive tree. And what you might already know about trees is that The root system grows as deep and as wide as what we see in the branches on top. So however high and however wide the branches of your tree are, that's actually how deep and wide the root system is. Remember what the root system's job is. One, to hold up the tree so that in a storm it doesn't fall right down. And the other really important job of the root system is it sucks in the nutrients from the soil and the water and feeds the branches and the flowers and the leaves and the fruit, whatever's going to happen in that tree. So remember, the root system is really where the tree gets its nourishment so that it can feed what we see on top, right? And so in order for a tree to bring its gifts to us, its shade, its beauty, its bounty of fruit and flowers, its habitat for critters, it really needs that deep and wide, slow-growing nourishment system, which is the root system. So now just for a moment, imagine that your same big, beautiful tree with all of its potential to bring gifts to the world, shade us, house the animals, bring us fruit, only has a really kind of sparse root system, maybe just a few fast roots that grew straight down, a few stragglers here and there. Imagine what happens if two squirrels are fighting, squirreling around on the trunk, going all around in the branches, fighting over territory or a nut. It wouldn't take much before that tree would fall over and not be able to support that. Maybe a wind comes by. Yeah? Without that really deep root system, trees can't really give us all their gifts. Yeah? So this is an analogy, my friends, for the bottom-up approach to child development. When I speak of this tree metaphor, what I'm saying is the roots of the tree is the body and the lower parts of the brain of the child, and the flowering, blossoming, fruiting branches with leaves on top is the higher order thinking skills and the gifts that the children bring us. Yeah, so the fantasizing imagination, decoding symbol, writing, reading, all of those things I think of as the branches. Yeah, and the physical mechanics and the things that should be automatic, the things that feed us are the branches. So if you have not yet, go ahead and open your eyes slightly, blink them a little bit. The tree is a great metaphor for a bottom-up approach to child development, guys. So the bottom-up approach to child development honors the slow unfolding of childhood, meaning there's no rush in a bottom-up approach, and it also honors the natural development of our brain from bottom to top. Let's talk about that first point. The bottom-up approach honors the slow unfolding of childhood, where we do not rush children from one developmental threshold to the next. Yeah? So let's think about this. How many times have you heard a parent kind of be really proud and talking about, well, my child skipped crawling altogether. They just went right to walking. And what they're saying and implying is that they didn't, like, my baby didn't even need to skip. She's advanced. She went right on to walking. And what I love about this is to see the look and pride in parents' eyes when they're describing these things, right? My child didn't roll. He didn't roll to both sides. He just went right on, just stood up and started walking. Or we do it even with reading, right? My child taught herself how to read when she was 3. So in our culture, which is a top-down culture, right? Right now, we're all kind of looking at children through a top-down lens, which means this. Since reading is good and walking is good, then walking and reading early must be really good, right? So the top-down approach thinks of, here's what we want, this is the ideal, and as soon as we can get a child there, that's the best way to do it. The bottom-up approach knows that these things take time. There's an order and sequence, and each developmental threshold is triggering the next one in line. There's a sequence of events, there's a sequence of movements, and there's a sequence of development that each need their time so that there's no real reason to skip or rush past one, right? So allowing a child to move through all the stages is the hallmark of a bottom-up approach to child development. And it's a little different than the way we've been thinking about this for so many years with the walking is good, so walking early must be good. And we are all guilty of this, right? Even knowing what I know and having the job I have, when I had my child, I do remember calling my dad and saying, he's putting these Lego sets together that are intended for 9 to 13-year-olds. Right? And he's 5. And I'm like, oh, my child's so smart, my child's so advanced, right? So we're all kind of looking for that advancement, right? We all kind of want signs that our child is going to have an easy time in school. They're really smart, they're really advanced, because we want that joy and ease for them in school, right? So in the bottom-up approach, it's a little bit different. We value each and every stage for its role that it contributes to brain development and nervous system development and optimal school readiness and a lifelong love of learning. So when you think about this and our tree metaphor, you know that those big oak trees take time to grow, right? This doesn't happen overnight. It also takes time to grow a really robust nervous system, yeah? So that's the first hallmark of the bottom-up approach, a slow unraveling and honoring all of the organic stages. The second hallmark, which really piggybacks on the first hallmark of slow unrolling, is honoring the brain's development. And so I like to talk about the triune brain theory. Now, some of you have probably heard this. It's an oldie but a goodie. And it's true, we know so much more about the brain and its roles and its parts and its pieces and its plasticity. But if we go back to the triune brain theory, it really helps anchor some of these concepts in the bottom-up approach to child development. So I am going to talk to you about the triune brain theory. Triune just means 3. So we've got 3 parts of the brain that we're going to talk about in this segment. The first part I want to introduce to you is the lower part of the brain. Sometimes we call it the brain stem. Sometimes we call it reptilian brain, hindbrain. We are really just talking about this low part of the brain connects the brain to the spinal column. Yeah, so hindbrain, reptilian brain, low brain, brain stem. And what the hindbrain's job is to regulate everything that is automatic. So think of heart regulation, temperature regulation, fight or flight responses, everything that we do without thinking, blinking, swallowing, breathing, that's regulated by the lower part of the brain stem. Then we move up to the limbic system, sometimes called the mammalian brain, often called the midbrain, and it sits right in between the 2 hemispheres, and it's like a little walnut, yeah? Limbic system, shape of a little walnut, sits right in the middle, yeah? And its job is to regulate emotions, memory, and learning. Then we move up to the third part of the brain, which is the cortex, sometimes called the prefrontal cortex. And it sits at the top and the front of our brain. And this is the one that's divided into 2 hemispheres. You've probably heard of right and left hemisphere. So we have that division in the cortex. And the jobs of the cortex are the really fancy, higher order thinking skills that we think are unique to humans. Foresight, hindsight, decoding symbol, which is just another way of saying looking at a 3 on a page and knowing it's this, knowing its value, right? Looking at an A on a page and knowing it says ah, knowing its sound and how to use it when we read. So that's what I mean by decoding symbol. Mathematics, fantasizing, imagination, all of these higher order thinking skills are regulated in the prefrontal cortex. Now, the way in which I just described them is also the way in which we develop them. So we first develop the hindbrain, then the limbic system, then the cortex. And it takes a good long time. You've been hearing people say the cortex isn't fully developed until we're 25, 26, 27. And then of course it continues to develop our whole life. Yeah. So it's from about 0 to walking. That is the really crucial portion for our meeting together today. So from 0 to walking is the perfect biological window to wire the lower part of the brain and check all of those boxes. Some of those boxes are very obvious to us. Warmth, hunger, or not being hungry, warmth, nutrition, safety, love, all of those kinds of shelter, right? The sense of feeling safe. When we think of hindbrain development, those are the boxes that we think need to be checked. But I'm going to add another one here, which is physical movements, right? And so the underlying mechanics of learning all also reside in the low brain. And in a top-down world, we like to think of learning as all up here. In the bottom-up world, we know that the body has a huge job in what I call invisible mechanics of learning. So one of the invisible mechanics of learning is the ability to keep one arm stable while the other one writes or moves, right? So this is an invisible mechanics of learning. Now you can imagine when you get to 2nd grade and you're learning to write and you're writing a lot, you would want this invisible mechanics of learning to be as automatic as blinking and swallowing. Therefore, your big fancy cortex can be freed up to think about grammar, punctuation, spelling. What do I want to write about? Visualizing what I want to write about. So this is a perfect example, guys, of how the roots or body or hindbrain is feeding the cortex. And this helps us understand how important that window from conception to walking is. Everything that happens in that window is setting children up for success at school in regards to cognition and academic performance and social emotional development and self-regulation. So in the bottom-up approach, we really focus on this 0 to walking window when the hindbrain is getting all of its boxes checked. Now that I've given an example of how the low brain wants to be in service of the cortex, we're going to do an activity. So at this point, if you don't have something to write with and a notebook or a sheet of paper, I'm going to let you go get that now. Great, so now that you have a pen and a pencil, I'm going to guide you through an activity to give you a little better understanding of what I mean by the low brain and the body support our higher order thinking for the rest of our life. All right, my friends, you have something to write with and some paper. So just make yourself comfortable at your desk or your table where you're sitting. I'm going to do a really brief little writing exercise. Nothing too painful, nothing to stress about. It's just going to be really sweet and short and sweet. So I'm going to read a passage to you, and then I'm going to stop, and you're going to write what you think might come next. Once a tree stood alone on a hill by a river. Through the long days, its leaves fluttered in the soft summer breeze. But then the days grew shorter, and the nights longer, and the winds became cold, and the tree began to change. I'm going to give you a moment to write what comes next in the life of this tree. Okay, great, difference makers. Go ahead and stop writing. And now we're going to do something very similar, meaning that I'll read another passage and then you'll write what comes next, just like the first exercise. But this one will be a little different, so follow my instructions pretty closely here. So I want you to stand up and put your pencil or pen in your non-dominant hand, so the hand that you typically don't write with. You'll need your notebook while you're standing, not your computer. You'll need your notebook. Great, and then I want you to lift one foot off the floor. And maintain this position while we do part 2 of the exercise. The tree spent the cold short days and even colder long nights frozen and still on top of the hill, until one day the earth began to soften and the sun began to shine brighter, and again the tree began to change. Maintaining this new position, write what comes next. All right, difference makers, go ahead and put your writing utensils down. Whew. And now what I'd like you to do is turn to a neighbor, and I'd like you to be in groups of 2, and if we need to, groups of 3. And I'm going to give you about 5 to 7 minutes to talk to your neighbor about how that was for you. How did the first one compare to the second one? How did you feel during the second one? Just whatever came up for you during this exercise. Since I'm not in the room, I can't comment on what I see. But when we regroup, I will tell you what I typically see during this exercise. But right now, find a friend, take 5 to 7 minutes, and I'll come back on and tell you what I often see. right, difference makers, let's regroup after that activity. And again, I'm not in the room with you, so I don't know how it went, but these are some common things that I see. First of all, during the second portion, there are behaviors, right? And I don't know if there was any in your group, but there's laughing, there's giggling, there's asking a lot of questions, there's like looking around like, what? People also report feeling like they just wanted to change the words because they kind of couldn't find their spelling when they had their non-dominant hand and the foot up and they were standing. So the point of this exercise is to give you some what I call kinesthetic empathy for what it might feel like if the invisible mechanics of learning are not there to serve you. So that is, your root system is not robust and strong and can't feed your branches. So things like, I just wanted to give up, I got really frustrated, I chose different words, I started daydreaming, I kind of was trying to figure out a way to get out of it, like, oh, maybe it's time to go to the bathroom. So I'm sure you and your partner discussed all the ways the second one felt different. Then what I usually like to pose to students is, how would you feel now if we were going to put that second version up in the hallway for parent-teacher conferences? Does it feel like it represents you? Probably not. So just to give you some kinesthetic empathy, let's say we're in 3rd or 4th grade and we're writing this assignment. If a child's invisible mechanics of learning are not supporting them, their bodies become a hindrance to the work instead of a help expressing the work, right? So their bodies are stealing resources from the cortex, and the cortex cannot do its job. So what do I mean by invisible mechanics of learning? I know we touched on helper hand, mover hand is one of them, but there's 2 other key ones that I want to bring up to you now. Another invisible mechanics of learning is the ability to track your eyes without thinking about it, right? So as I'm writing, my eyes are tracking the words on the page, and also as I'm reading, eyes are tracking the words. And what I mean by tracking is following the words so that I can read. If this doesn't happen automatically, meaning as naturally as blinking and swallowing, then we have less space in our cortex because, guys, the cortex is pretty powerful. It can do anything. So if we have the cortex moving the eyes for us, instead of it being as natural as blinking and swallowing, it's eating up and gobbling up that important space for punctuation, grammar, spelling, visualizing what I want to write about. And therefore, we have an instance where the low brain is not supporting branches, it's actually hindering and exhausting branches, yeah? So in this exercise where you didn't have those invisible mechanics that we take for granted, you might have found that you couldn't access your cortex as well, yeah? And this is what's happening across the nation with older students, is that these invisible mechanics of learning have not been developed and therefore creating problems for students and the ability to engage in school. The last invisible mechanics of learning that I want to share with you today is the ability to ground your lower body so your upper body can move. So this is a basic physics concept, guys. Something has to be still so the other thing can move. And we saw it here too. Something has to be still so the other thing can move. And now I'm talking about the lower body needs to be able to sit still in the chair or on the ground and circle so the upper body can express, either by clapping and doing the motions of a song, or by writing, playing an instrument. Think of sitting still on the bottom, grounded, while you're practicing the piano or even driving. So this ability to ground through the lower body and express the upper body is another invisible mechanics of learning that we take for granted that children will have when they get to school. But what we're seeing is kids kind of slouching in their chair, can't find a good position, want to stand up instead of ground through, kind of wiggly wormy, sitting on their heels maybe at dinner or in their chairs, rocking a lot. So those are all signs that the invisible mechanics of grounding through the lower body and expressing the upper body are not as natural as blinking and swallowing, and it's kind of creating some problems in the either learning or emotional regulation. All right, so as infant care providers, you might be thinking, well, what am I supposed to do about this? Why are we learning about reading and writing in big kids? Well, I'm going to remind you, remember when we talked about the triune brain and the low brain development being the seat of everything that's automatic, blinking and swallowing, and all these invisible mechanics of learning? And I also told you that the optimal window of development for the low brain was between conception and walking. And that's you guys. That's the infant care provider's time. Between conception and walking, well, between birth and walking for you guys, but that is your time. That's when you're with the children. So that's what it has to do with infant care providers and your extremely important role in child development. I'm going to add some pieces to what we've learned about the triune brain theory to help anchor what it is you can do as infant care providers to help infants develop their brains optimally, in that window of conception to walking. So you'll remember the 3 parts of the brain: low brain, midbrain, cortex. Now I'm going to add a movement component to each one of those. So the movement component that we add to hindbrain development, conception to walking, is that the optimal body position for the hindbrain to wire and work all of its boxes and make movements as natural as blinking and swallowing like we need them to be is on a firm, flat surface. So from conception to walking, babies are designed to be moving through the infant sequence, and the best place for them to do that is on a firm, flat surface. It's almost impossible for them to move through the infant sequence while they're upright, like in a high chair or a bumbo or a jolly jumper or a car seat. They actually have to have unrestricted movement on this horizontal plane. The horizontal plane is paired with low brain development. So think of it as the horizontal plane is the place where if you learn the mechanics of learning here, they will become as natural as blinking and swallowing, so that when you're upright and you're in school writing about your sky tree, your tree assignment, then the invisible mechanics will be as automatic as blinking and swallowing if you are fortunate enough to learn the skills in a horizontal position. So I'm going to give you a quick example of what I mean by this. When the infants are about 4 months, they're supporting their weight on 2 arms. And in order to get the toy in front of them, they've got to lean on one side so they can free up the other hand to grab the toy. Now that is the exact same mechanics as helper hand, mover hand. So that moment a 4-month-old has bilateral stance and takes weight on one hand to free up the other hand, that is a part of preparing for school. People don't often think that the movements that infants do have such a strong role in school readiness, but I'm here to tell you they really do. Now, fast forward to the cortex, and we're not skipping over limbic system. I just want to fast forward us to cortex for a moment and tell you that the physical component that I'm adding to what we know about cortex, which is the seat of everything that's unique to humans: foresight, hindsight, decoding symbol, reading and writing, mathematics, fantasizing, imagination, thinking through consequences. The optimal position for the body to access the cortex is upright, how you and I are right now. When you are upright, you are in the position to best access and develop the prefrontal cortex. So now you're thinking to yourself, what does that have to do with us as infant teachers again? Probably. So here's what it is, guys. In order for things to become as natural as blinking and swallowing, infants have to be where? Correct, on a firm, flat surface. But I'm here to tell you that most infants in America are propped up in an upright position for 2/3 of their day. So when an infant is propped up, what part of their brain are they wiring? The cortex. This is not optimal. The cortex has so many important, beautiful, brilliant jobs to do later, right? Remember, it's the branches. It's the branches, it's the flowers, it's the fruit, it's the habitat, it's the shade. And so we want to make sure that the infants are growing their roots on a firm, flat surface. But what's actually happening, guys, is babes are spending 600 hours a year, their first year of life, in a car seat. So that's not a firm, flat surface. The number one thing you can do is offer the babies as much unrestricted movement time as possible on a firm, flat surface. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, Stephanie, can't they learn helper hand, mover hand while they're sitting in a bumbo playing with some blocks, or while they're in their high chair messing around with their food? Won't they learn helper hand, mover hand? I want to investigate what we mean by learn. Yes, maybe the body will learn to do it, but when they're upright, guys, if they learn a skill upright, it's going to become part of the prefrontal cortex's job. Yeah, their prefrontal cortex is going to be doing helper hand, mover hand, and that's going to leave less room for decoding symbol, writing, reading, mathematics, fantasizing, thinking through consequences, all of those higher order thinking skills. When the skill of helper hand, mover hand, and all the other invisible mechanics of learning are learned on a firm, flat surface, they become as natural as blinking and swallowing, and therefore we free up the branches. So it's true that the mechanics can be learned from an upright position, but it's not optimal. We want these things to be as automatic as blinking and swallowing, and the one way to do that is to give infants as much unrestricted movement as possible. All right, guys, you'll remember back a little earlier when I said I'm not skipping over the limbic system. I just wanted to establish that relationship between the automatic function of the low brain and how that supports the higher order thinking and the school readiness. So now that we've established that, let's review what we know about the triune brain, because I'm going to add another component here. So what we've got is low brain development, need to be on a firm, flat surface. Its optimal window is conception to walking, regulates everything that's automatic. Heart regulation, temperature regulation, fight or flight responses, everything that's automatic and we don't think of. Then jump up to the cortex, where the optimal window, which I haven't said yet, but is between 7 and 25. Yes, you heard me right, 7 and 25. And we're gonna have to dive into that in another training. We won't do that here. But the optimal window for the cortex is 7 years old to 25. And then we kind of just skipped this limbic system, yeah? So we know about the cortex that we need to be upright to access it. We know about the low brain that we need to be on a firm, flat surface. Let's flesh out a little bit more about the limbic system. So there's not a real clear body position for limbic system development, but remember our toddlers who are kind of busy going from up to down, kind of in that middle space, crawling, walking, crawling again, that middle space during toddlerhood, where they're also showing us these unbridled fits of passion and unrestrained emotion. And remember, the limbic system regulates emotion, memory, and learning. So here's what's important about the bottom-up approach and the triune brain theory and the limbic system, guys, is once boxes are checked in the lower part of the brain, safety, warmth, nourishment, fight or flight responses, firm, flat surface, all the movement, when all of that has its due time, the human brain actually sends stimulus up through the limbic system, emotions, memory, and learning, and continues to send stimulus up to the cortex. And by stimulus, I mean neurotransmitters are firing. And the human brain has a lot of neurotransmitters that go from the low brain through midbrain up to the cortex. So this is another way of thinking of the bottom-up approach. Yes, it's the body up to the brain, but it's also the low brain up to the higher parts of the brain, yeah? So when we have a situation like this, it's optimal. It's optimal development, check the boxes in the low brain, then we go and we have our stimulus and we can grow emotions, memory, and learning, self-regulation, yeah? Before we get up to the higher order thinking. So in a top-down world, which is basically what we're all operating in right now, we are so concerned with filling this vessel full of facts and figures, right? Early learning, early letter recognition, early learning your colors, early reading, early writing, early. The earlier, the better. The earlier we get the kids to do that, the better. So we're really focusing on this cortex development, right? And so what's important to know about the human brain, guys, is, I always say human brain, but it's basically all brains, is that there's no neural fibers sending messages from the big fancy cortex down through limbic system, emotions, memory, and learning, down to the low parts of the brain. It's just not how we're built. We're built to send fibers from the bottom through the limbic system to the top. So in a top-down world, we might get really bright children who can recite their colors, who know how to read early, can memorize the capitals of all the states, very precocious with their words, really kind of awake and intellectual, and that makes us really happy as adults. We're like, yay, we did it, right? But what we're missing is that social emotional development, because no neurotransmitters went through and helped that child develop that, because that's not how we're made. We're made to go from the bottom to the top. So when I talk about bottom-up child development and how important it is for school readiness and how important the role of the infant care provider is in school readiness, this is the kind of stuff I mean. It's not just helper hand, mover hand. It's not just horizontal eye tracking. It's also this social emotional development, because the way we're wired is we go from the bottom, feed social emotional development, and then get to the higher order thinking. But that's not how we're doing childhood. We're doing it early, then we'll skip the limbic system development, right? So what we end up getting, guys, and these are all the kids in my practice, right? So when I talk about these children, I'm speaking from experience and from a close place in my heart for these children. What we're getting is a lot of kids who are very bright, but ... You can fill in the blank there. Very bright, but not reading at grade level. Very bright, but can't manage their emotions. Very bright, can't sit still in the chair. Very bright, really messy writing. So there's any number of things you can fill in there when we approach the children from a top-down approach to child development, where we're really thinking of how fast can we get them smart. We're missing a really major piece, and I think you're seeing it in all the older children in your lives too, right? They're really bright, they can read early, they can talk circles around us usually, right? They know things we don't know, they know things that we didn't know at that age. However, the social emotional development and some of the academic performance is actually compromised too. It's not just they don't get limbic system development, they don't get helper hand, mover hand, so they might be very bright, but unable to do the homework, unable to express themselves in class, unable to write what they're thinking. And it's almost as if we're manufacturing some of these learning challenges by living and raising the children in a top-down approach. So my friends, this is sort of a crash course overview in bottom-up child development. I want you to know that other courses I teach really flush out each part of the infant sequence and how it's a bridge to social emotional development and how it's a bridge to cognitive development and school readiness. And we take each part of the infant sequence and kind of flush it out and see how infant care providers can really ensure that babies are moving through all those stages. Yeah, so again, big crash course today in this hour. I've thrown a lot of information at you. What I'd like to do now is say goodbye. However, I have left some time at the end of our course because I'd really love you to turn to a neighbor and just give the ahas. So after I say goodbye, turn to a neighbor or maybe your partner from the Sky Tree exercise in groups of 2 or 3 and talk about, holy smokes, what was an aha? And what's going to be tricky about this? This is a lot of new information. And so the only real tool I gave you today was keep the babies on a firm, flat surface as much as you can in your setting. And I'm going to add to that, go ahead and encourage families to keep babies on a firm, flat surface as much as they can at home, knowing that there are obstacles, right? So sometimes you can't get infants on a firm, flat surface as much as you'd like in a daycare setting. So it's always okay to just tell parents, hey, I bet he'd really like some extra time rolling around on the floor today. We couldn't really get to that today, or there were so many of us today and only a few hands. So just giving some kind of encouragement for families to do that at home is really the first steps. And I look forward to teaching you more about the bottom-up approach to child development and your wonderful and very important role as infant care providers and all the things you can do to help. So with that, I will say goodbye for now. Turn to your neighbor and talk, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care now, difference makers.